Welcome to the Parkinson's podcast Unfiltered with hosts Heather Kennedy and Kat Hill, brought to you by the Davis-Phinney Foundation. Heather is originally from New York and was diagnosed with young-onset Parkinson's in 2011 when she was 40. Kat is originally from a small town in California and was diagnosed in 2015 when she was 48. Heather and Kat have been friends since they met at the World Parkinson Congress in 2019. In each episode, Heather and Kat dive deep into the raw emotions and realities of life with Parkinson's.
Hello.
Kat Hill, it's good to see you and talk with you today.
Oh,
lucky.
Same with you, friend. I feel so blessed. Here we are on our two coasts, West Coast and East Coast.
And distance requires some amount of gymnastics when it comes to communication. It's not easy to text and be understood without nuance, body language, facial expression. Some things that change when you happen to have something like Parkinson's.
Like Parkinson's. You know, I think, Heather, what's interesting is I think communication is hard even when you don't have neurologic challenge, right? I think it takes work and commitment and patience. And I think in this fast-paced world where we're communicating by text, by phone, by email, by WhatsApp, by Facebook, by all the things, it is even more complicated for those of us trying to juggle basic communication. And I also think a big part of communication is our interpretation and often misinterpretation. And I sure find in my personal life, and I found this before my diagnosis, it is that we come with our own agendas. And so we hear through that filter. And I think it's more critical than ever that we're able to check in with one another about what we're hearing. I've been trying, I know in Ken and I's relationship, we've been married a long time, and we often order the same foods. We finish each other's sentences. You know, we are really two peas in a pod in many, many ways. And yet we continue to have challenges with communication. And I think with Parkinson's, we're both making some assumptions with it. I tend to finish the conversations in my head and then jump ahead, and I'm out of sorts, and he doesn't know where I'm going with things. And fair enough, right?
Well, there's that meme where there is a couple sitting on the couch, and they both have thought bubbles, and the woman's saying, he must think I'm fat. He's cheating on me. He's not interested in me anymore. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Maybe the wedding's off. And she turns to him and she says, how are you? And his thought bubble shows a motorcycle and a steak. And that's a gross exaggeration of something that's totally, it's a bit misogynistic, I suppose. But the truth is, we often have these narratives or stories that we carry. We're not even aware of it. For example, I'm not aware when I'm dysregulated. So if I enter a conversation already dysregulated, and maybe my meds are off as well, add an ADD, which makes me impatient and I cut people off, I'm probably not going to be fun to talk with. But I'm not aware of that. So I'm wondering, where did everybody go?
I can't imagine that you wouldn't be fun to talk with. I enjoy talking with you very much. But I can appreciate how much energy it takes when you have challenges, and trying to be aware of those challenges while also trying to communicate. But there's so many subtleties in communication. And I think I had the opportunity to talk with a fascinating woman, and her name is Jackie Hunt Christensen. And she is a Parkinson's advocate, an environmental advocate, and a woman who had young onset Parkinson's. And she is working on a film about speech and how speech changes, especially sometimes after deep brain stimulation, and how some of these new assisted devices are helping bridge that gap but there's so much to communication. It's more than just voice to text. You and I were talking about this perception that when texts are sent, some people think that they need urgent attention, and others of us are just kind of communicating and working with a thread. So it's easy to miss or get hurt feelings, right? And so it's very difficult for us to make assumptions around that.
Whenever I meet people, I tend to tell them, by the way, I use text as a message board. I don't use text for urgent matters usually, unless I say SOS or 911 or can we meet at 3 specifically and we have a deadline. Text might go on and on for me because I use voice to text, which is impossible to edit. And to give you an idea, I have 293 texts that appear not open on my phone because I'll roll the conversation back and forth and get to it when I can. I always get to it, but email is very hard. So I always tell people I prefer text. If you call, I'm probably not going to get to the phone. For example, right now my phone's off for 2 hours, but the text would get here.
I find too, Heather, and I don't know if you find, using a keyboard or a keypad is very, very difficult with fine motor stuff with Parkinson's, and then you add the dystonia part, and I still do type, but it's very frustrating and I'm very slow with it. So my typing does not keep up with my brain. It really never has because I'm not that great of a typist, but
no, because you're lightning speed. Your lightning speed brain.
Right. That's me. Speedy cat.
That's right. Speed racer.
Speed racer. Yeah. Well, it's hard to be a speed racer in your brain and a snail or slug with your hands. I was particularly touched. I'm going to circle back to this conversation I had with Jackie Christensen. And she was talking about how difficult it is after her DBS. She's got very slow speech. And again, we are so fast paced in this world. She talks about the challenges of getting thoughts out to her healthcare providers and how quick everybody is to fill in her sentences for her. And then providers stop talking to her directly and talk to her care partner.
Oh, yes. My grandma used to experience that a lot. She was just brilliant. And they would say, what does Helen think about this? And my mother and father would say, she's right here. Why don't you ask her? There's a discomfort people feel too when they have to listen harder or they have their own problems, such as maybe some hearing loss or the person's stuttering. I clutter my words sometimes when I'm off, of course. But I've talked to Mike Q about this, Mike Aiken and Mike Q, and they always said DBS has changed my speech and is the hardest symptom of Parkinson's, hands down. No contest. It cuts them out from being able to participate. Mike Aiken left the Mike and Mike show, and I joined to try to, add to the party because Mike Q needed some assistance there. But he's a thoughtful, brilliant, radio guy who's losing his ability to speak, just like your friend. Let's hear more about her book.
I think she's working on like a documentary, and it's not out yet, but it's called Come Talk to Me. So I think she's got a website, and I think I'd really like to encourage people to think about keeping an eye out for it, because I think she's got some really profound insights. And I enjoyed talking with her very much. And it helped me to slow down and be in the moment, to let her to finish her thoughts. And I could appreciate how incredibly challenging it would be and how challenging it is for me, but it gave me some humility in the moment, I will say.
Thank you so much for talking with her.
Yeah. Heather, have you noticed a difference in your speech since DBS? I'm curious.
Huge. Unfortunately, I have to go to speech therapy. Right now, I was just reminded that one reason the microphone is not clear is because I keep wiggling around. I'm extremely dyskinetic. I can speak. I took a lot of meds, a little too close together after a workout, because usually I tank after workouts. But seeing you lifted my dopamine. So here I am, world. Wiggly, wiggly.
Yeah, connection's important with this disease, and connection can bring us dopamine, but it also can wear us out.
Oh, yes. But what's the killer? Isolation. And if you can't communicate using language, which is, is there another way we could communicate, perhaps? Just walk up to each other and pat each other on the back, pet, 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 pet. Like dogs smell each other's butt. That would be good.
Or you put your hand on their head and like
In their heart.
and their heart and get like, well, it depends on how close of a friend.
Yeah, you might get punched depending on where you are.
I was just going to say, I don't think we claim to have all the answers, but I think posing the question and also pushing our partners, our care partners, and our healthcare providers to remember to have patience with our speech is huge. It's huge. And also, Parkinson's is complex, right? People think you shake. Yes, sometimes people shake, but there's a lot more to it. I think it's difficult to understand. It's difficult for me to understand, and I'm living with it. It's difficult for me to describe, but I'm trying. And I think we need to talk more about it. And I think we need to talk to our people, because I think our people, our care providers, our loved ones, our kids, our parents, I talk a lot to my dog. I don't know how much he's getting, but
I talk to myself and pretend I have a dog. I get so many dates.
Yeah.
May I also recommend saying something like, I don't think I've explained myself very well. What did you hear me say?
Perception checking. Yes. I feel like our communication was crossed, or maybe I didn't understand that right. Ken and I have to do this a lot, because it adds to that emotion. It adds to those, what did you call them? The idea bubbles, the brain bubbles?
Yes, those thought bubbles.
Thought bubbles, right? So there's this whole thought bubble going on that I'm down in my brain, and he's saying something, meaning something completely different. And I think that a lot of miscommunication maybe we could give ourselves grace and give others grace in what they're texting, and also trying to not read between the lines.
You're good at that, Kat. You're very diplomatic too. You're very careful about not getting involved in gossip or getting hooked by someone who's trying to use confirmation bias to prove their point. You're reasonable and calm. Whenever I've called you for advice, you always say something like, well, maybe they didn't hear you, or maybe they just don't know, which is true. I didn't know before I knew about anything. For example, my neighbor, I always thought he was drinking a lot. His wife just told me, because I'm back in that area right now visiting. His wife just said he had Parkinson's. Growing up, I thought he was just drinking. So even I judged my peeps growing up. We all just assumed. She said it caused them a lot of trouble in their family when the whole community thought that.
I mean, it's a great example, Heather. And there are some assumptions being made about those with, physical disabilities too, that if somebody presents with a physical challenge or a tic or a motor symptom, folks often jump to that they must have cognitive issues as well. And that isn't always the case. And that's it feels very dismissing. And I think in our society, we have some growth to do in terms of compassion and empathy. And I think we must start caring more about one another, or we're going to doom ourselves, right? And I think compassion is a big part of it.
How to listen actively with compassion and empathy. It requires us, though, to feel good about ourselves first, right? So take a nice deep breath and ground before you start. Set an intention, maybe, for those most difficult conversations. Zip yourself up if you need to, but don't put the armor on too much. You can use boundaries without having, to go through gates and moats and chainmail.
Right. Chainmail can be optional.
Right. Good luck dancing in it. It's kind of sweaty and itchy.
What are some strategies? I liked your strategy a lot about asking people up front about, or telling people that how you use your text messaging. And I think that's a great way to share that. I also think I'm learning to not pick up the phone or not reply to a text if I am off or if I am feeling overwhelmed. I find when I'm overwhelmed, my fine motor's off, or I'm more apt to say something, or I'm more apt to say something off in the voice to text.
You're not an operator. You don't need to answer all the calls. And we have trouble answering the calls in the order that's important. We answer them in the order they're received usually when we're off. Our executive functioning being of trouble. We're not organizing things. So incoming stimulus is overwhelming. It can knock you sideways. I was just reading another thing I want to share with you. May I?
Please.
There are 4 types of misunderstandings according to something I read in psychology today a while back. I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a lot of misunderstandings with people because I process very quickly and I jump ahead and make up narratives that aren't really solid or true. I get emotional. I do all the wrong things. So I'm learning. So there's one, it's called bypassing. So when you think you know what they're going to say, you just zoom right on through. Second one is abstraction, just not being clear enough. People don't know what you mean. It's sort of like out of context things. The third one is this relative language. Not everyone shares the same language. That's so important to note. You know that what means one thing in one culture means a totally different thing in another. And then the last one is equivocations or comparisons. Like we'll just make these comparisons to things that just don't fit. The person was trying to give us advice and we thought they were trying to be arrogant and tell us that they were right and we were wrong. But that's about how we feel about ourselves.
I think another piece for me has been I communicate with fewer people.
Yes.
Now with Parkinson's, I don't have the brain space, the executive function to maintain as many relationships. And for me, that feels sad in some ways, but I think it's also healthy. I'm determined to nurture and tend to and put energy into conversations with the people that mean the most to me. And I'm aware that it takes more energy now to communicate and to set intentions and to try to avoid the 4 mishaps. And I've been finding, I'm like you, Heather, I process quickly. And so sometimes I jump ahead. But the other thing that I'm doing, I'm realizing, is I'm kind of having the conversation in my head. And then my responses are abstract because I'm responding a third of the way through the conversation that I was having in my own head. And so, of course, people are lost when I think of, oh, don't think I said that out loud.
Right? And you have the best intentions. We've all played Cassandra too. No one listens to Cassandra, but she'll show up like in Shakespearean plays and say an absolute truth. Because people aren't ready to hear it or they don't want to hear it, the messenger gets slayed. She says things, she blurts them out. She's usually right, but being right and being the messenger is not going to be a good position to be in. Have any of us ever been in the situation where we expect our partner to sort of read our mind? Like you should have known. So by the time you say something to them, you're not only a little angry, perhaps mercurial, like, the scary collie or something, or you're just exhausted. You're like, do we really have to go over this again? And you're saying in your mind, here we go again. Then you start characterizing the other person, which is never going to go well. Immediately putting them on the defensive. So what I like to do is sandwich. I'll say something like, hey, you have been so supportive of me. I really appreciate that about you. You try so hard to understand a disease that I barely understand, and I have it. I live with it every day. You're just witnessing it, and you're doing a great job of understanding so much. However, when we talk like this, it hurts my feelings because can we do it differently? What can we do? Inviting them in, say, we. I don't always do this, but this is optimal. Sometimes I just say bad words and walk away. At the end, I'll sandwich it again. I'll say, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you again because ... Just an idea.
I realized living in the Airstream with Ken, how much I utilized having a space to walk away to and a door to shut when I was feeling a lot of emotion and a place to simmer down before I tried to get words in my head. And we learned a lot about communication and living that tight together. And I think it's important to acknowledge that if you need some space and need to kind of separate the emotion from the actual communication, for me, I try to do that if I'm starting to get activated.
Because you can self-regulate.
Well, most of the time, I'm starting to have a lot of off time. I just try not to have conversations if I'm going off or I don't feel good. I'll say, can we do this? Can we talk about this another time when my meds are on? Or the morning is a better time for me and always has been. So I think it's important.
We touch on paying attention to the feelings behind the messages, perhaps in what's not being said. And then I would add on, some people or some communicators are hard to decipher whether or not they've had DBS. Maybe there's, I don't know, something else happening. Maybe there's some accent or some way of communicating that we don't really relate to. So we make our judgments about, well, if I said that, that would mean this. And that is not true. I can't put my template on you. I have to use your template.
Right. And also, it's not just DBS that causes speech difficulty, Parkinson's. We start to slow down. Our voices get softer. I haven't had DBS. And I know at times for me, keeping my voice volume high enough takes a lot of energy just to keep the conversation going. My dad and his Parkinson's had a lot of trouble with speech. And keeping up with a fast conversation when your brain is processing slower is a huge challenge in Parkinson's. We all talk fast. We share communication quickly. There's back and forth and back and forth. And when we become slower to process everything, it takes us more time. And that takes changing the tone and the cadence and the rhythm of conversations that you have with everybody. And I think that we can't underscore how challenging that is for us with Parkinson's, but also for the people in our lives when they can have a different cadence, rhythm, interaction with the rest of the world. And they have to remember, we've got to slow it down. We can keep up sometimes in our brain, but we can't respond on cue like we used to. It's hard to explain. Clearly, I'm not doing a great job of it.
No, it is so true. It's like being in a different part of your brain. It's very similar to when we freeze while we're walking. I need to jump or skip or have a beat and march or run. I can run sometimes when I can't walk. Same thing with speech. We have to jar ourselves out of that rut we get in. Otherwise, there's just an uneasiness, thinking others are the source of our misery. And that, again, is not true. We need full responsibility. Yes, it's a lot, but it is our responsibility to communicate this. It's not my friends and my family's responsibility. It's mine. It's hard to be around. It does require listening.
It requires listening. And I also think it requires, on the journey with this disease, a process of communication so that everybody involved understands that this is a process. Age does this to us too. So as we age, it takes us longer to move, to process. You mentioned earlier the challenges of having hearing impairment and the parts of communication that are missed and some of the subtleties. And so you can imagine if you add those confounding factors, it's going to take more energy to communicate. And if we can't communicate, it's hard to build and maintain genuine relationships. It needs to be a priority.
Yes, to feel connected, to be part of, to be useful, to be valid, to be humanized.
To be heard.
Yes, heard and seen.
Heard and seen.
And I'll just leave you with this one last quote. Hafiz says, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions." Fear causes us a lot of, we're really just asking, will you still love me? I'm imperfect and I screwed up. Will you still love me? That's what we're really asking. We get in arguments with people.
And Heather, how beautiful if we can say that. My intent was not to hurt you. I'm doing the best I can do. And I'm scared also. We all get scared. We all get lonely. We all sometimes We all say things we regret or wish we could take back.
Not me. I've never said anything.
You're just so quiet, Heather. I have such a hard time understanding how you're feeling.
Yeah, my friend said to me once, I never worry about what you're thinking because I know you're going to tell me whether I want you to or not.
Exactly. But I think being able to apologize is a huge part of communication.
Oh, yes.
It's a huge part, in my opinion, of parenting, of having relationships.
Emotional intelligence, emotion regulation, wisdom. And here you are. I remember you saying, I work very hard to stay positive. It's not because I haven't suffered, but you can regulate and ground, like we talked about. Identifying your own feelings is something a lot of people can't do. How can I expect them to have a conversation with me about feelings if they can't identify their own?
And I know sometimes in the moment I will feel, I use the word like activated, like I'm getting sort of upset or having a lot of feelings. And I'm not even sure what the feeling is, but my blood pressure goes up. I can feel my heart racing. And I've tried very hard to step back at that time. That's when I need a room and a door and the Airstream. I need the exit pod. Beam me up, Scotty. I'm about to have a meltdown. It's like off going for a walk, counting to 10, having a time out, right?
Also wanted to say that we can rest on things sometimes too. Muddy water let stand gets clear. We don't always have to react so immediately. That's where the apps do us wrong.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
We used to have to send something on with a horse in a courier. It took many days to get there. Like pigeons, yeah, we'd have to send a message by pigeons. Or what was the Morse code?
Yeah. Well, I hope we've touched on a couple of things, Heather, that might resonate with some folks. And I know that I want to keep working on this communication stuff. And I appreciate the forum and the Davis Phinney Foundation for letting us talk about how communication is really different sometimes while we're navigating these challenges, and really how communication is hard regardless of if you have Parkinson's or not. And let's pray for more compassion, both for ourselves and others. And I hope just that we've sparked a couple of thoughts for you all about communication. We appreciate you listening to us try to communicate.
Thank you for communicating with me. And thank you for teaching me to be a better communicator, more kind, patient, thoughtful communicator. Chris and Kat, it's nice hanging out with you today.
You as well, Heather. Thank you. You give me far too much credit, my friend.
You're the bomb.
All right. Until next time, huh?
Yeah, tell that cute guy you live with I said hi.
I will.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Parkinson's podcast Unfiltered with Heather Kennedy and Kat Hill. For more information about the Davis Phinney Foundation and to learn about educational offerings and community events for people affected by Parkinson's, please visit davisphinneyfoundation.org or dpf.org. This podcast includes information about Parkinson's and insights from our Parkinson's community. It is not intended as a substitute for treatment advice from your own medical providers.